Picture this. It's 3 in the afternoon. Your backpack is still on the floor by the front door, right where you dropped it. The house is quiet except for the hum of an old desktop tower and the dial-up era whine of a computer that's finally waking up. You open the browser, you don't type an address, you already know it by heart. And for the next few hours, you disappear into a world made of 9-year-old code and stick figures with sniper rifles, tower defense monkeys, a red-headed man riding a sled downhill for no reason at all. Nobody asked why, and nobody needed a reason. It just worked. Then one day, it didn't. Browsers started blocking it, and websites quietly pulled it down. And within a few short years, an entire universe of games, tens of thousands of them, built by teenagers in bedrooms and studios with a few $100s in software, simply vanished from the internet. Not slowly, but almost overnight. So what actually happened to Flash, and why does a defunct piece of Adobe software still mean so much to an entire generation that grew up in front of it? To answer that, we have to go back to a moment before any of this existed. Before the games, before the websites, before anyone had ever heard the word Flash at all. The story begins in the early 90s, when two programmers named Jonathan Gay and Charlie Jackson were building software for a category of computer that was supposed to be the next big thing, pen-based tablets. Their program was called Smart Sketch, a vector drawing tool meant for a stylus. The only problem was that pen computing collapsed almost as fast as it appeared. Nobody wanted these devices. But Gay and Jackson noticed something else happening at the same time. A strange, text-heavy, mostly static thing called the World Wide Web was starting to take off, and it had almost no support for animation. If you wanted motion on a web page back then, your best option was Java, and it was painfully slow. So they stripped the pen features out of Smart Sketch, kept the lightweight vector engine underneath, and turned it into something new. A tiny animation player built specifically for browsers. They called it Future Splash Animator, and it launched in 1995. It caught on fast. Microsoft used it to build TV-like experience for the MSN homepage. Disney used it for their Daily Blast website. For a two-person company with a shoestring budget, that was an enormous amount of exposure in a very short time. It was enough exposure, in fact, that a bigger company noticed. Macromedia had been trying and struggling to get their own web animation format called Shockwave off the ground. In December of 1996, they bought Future Wave outright and rebranded the software. Future Splash Animator became Macromedia Flash 1.0. Nobody in that room in 1996 had any idea they just created the format an entire generation would grow up inside of. For the first time in years, Flash was mostly an animation tool. You know, known for making cartoons, banner ads, the occasional interactive menu, etc. Games weren't really the point yet, because Flash simply didn't have the programming muscle to support them. But that changed in 1999, when Macromedia released Flash 4 and introduced ActionScript, a real scripting language hidden inside what had been a drawing program. Suddenly, you could track variables, you could build logic, you could make something that responded to a player instead of just playing on a loop. And there was already a place ready and waiting to host whatever came out of that shift. A teenager in Pennsylvania named Tom Fulp had launched a small personal website back in 1995. Over the next few years, it grew into something called Newgrounds, built around a radical idea for the first time. Anyone could upload their own animation or game, instantly, with no gatekeeper deciding what counted as good enough. In 1999, right as ActionScript arrived, Fulp released a game of his own called Pico's School. It was rough by later standards, but at the time it was unlike anything else on the web, a level of polish and interactivity nobody had seen from an amateur Flash project before. It didn't just prove Flash games were possible, it proved a single person working alone could make something that reached the entire internet. That idea is what really lit the fuse, because if one guy in Pennsylvania could do it, so could thousands of other people. Through the early 2000s, the ecosystem exploded outward. Newgrounds stayed the chaotic, creative heart of the scene, the place where boundary pushing and experimental work lived. In 2001, a site called Miniclip launched with a completely different philosophy, less about art, More about instant, addictive fun that loaded in under 30 seconds and played with nothing but arrow keys. Then came Armor Games in 2004, curating deeper strategy and adventure titles. Then Kongregate in 2006, which added something new to the formula, achievements and leaderboards, a layer of competition that turned a solitary hobby into something you bragged about. These weren't just websites. For a huge number of kids, they were the internet. You didn't need a console. You didn't need to ask your parents to buy anything. You needed the browser and the plugin that was already sitting on almost every computer on Earth. By the mid-2000s, Flash Player had a bigger installed base than any other media format in web history. That accessibility is the whole story. Flash games didn't win because they were the most advanced. They won because absolutely anyone could make one and absolutely anyone could play it for free and in seconds. And the games that came out of that openness are the ones you probably still remember by feel, if not always by name. Chances are you've played at least a few of these without ever knowing who made them. There was Alien Hominid, a scrappy run-and-gun game co-created by Tom Fulp and artist Dan Paladin, which got so popular on Newgrounds that the pair eventually built it into a full console release under a new studio called The Behemoth. There was Line Rider, the deceptively simple slid and pencil track game that turned physics into art. There was Bloons Tower Defense, which took a genre that barely existed and helped turn it into one of the most copied formats on the entire web. There was Fancy Pants Adventures, with its rubber band platforming and hand-drawn style that felt like nothing else in browser gaming. There was Madness Combat, the ultra-violent stick figure action series from an animator known as Crinkles, which built its own cult following one gunfight at a time. Later, Happy Wheels would take that same appetite for chaos and turn ragdoll physics into a genre of its own. None of these games needed a marketing budget, none of them needed a publisher. They spread because someone sent a link to a friend during class, and that friend sent it to someone else, and within a week, a game built by one or two people in their spare time had reached more players than most retail titles ever would. For a while, it felt like this could go on forever, a limitless chaotic playground with new discoveries every single day. But underneath all the momentum, the very thing making Flash so easy to love was quietly becoming the reason it would eventually fall apart. In December of 2005, Adobe bought Micromedia in a deal worth roughly $3.5 billion, folding Flash into its own creative software empire. On paper, this looked like a win. Flash now had the backing of one of the biggest software companies in the world. But Flash had a structural problem that money couldn't fix. It was browser plugin, a piece of third-party code running with deep access to your system, and that made it an enormous target. Over the years that followed, Flash Player became one of the most frequently exploited pieces of software on the internet, patched again and again and again against vulnerabilities that hackers kept finding. It was also a resource hog. Flash content was notorious for draining battery life and spiking CPU usage, which was a minor annoyance on a desktop and a real problem on something new that was about to change everything. When the first iPhone launched, it shipped without Flash support. At the time, that seemed like it might just be a temporary gap, something Apple would patch in. Adobe actually tried to get a stripped-down version of Flash working on the device behind the scenes, but it never happened. And in April 2010, Apple co-founder Steve Jobs made the decision permanent, publishing a public letter laying out exactly why Apple's mobile devices would never support it. Security holes, battery drain, and the format Jobs argued was built for a desktop era that mobile computing had already outgrown. At the time, it read like one company's opinion. In hindsight, it reads like a dead sentence with a 4-year delay built in, because mobile wasn't a side category anymore. It was becoming the primary way people got online, and an entire library of games that only worked through a desktop browser plugin had just been locked out of the platform that was about to define the next decade of the internet. For a few years, Flash held on through sheer inertia. Millions of desktop computers still had it installed. Millions of games still worked exactly as they always had. But the web itself was changing underneath the surface. New browser standards gathered loosely under the banner of HTML5. introduced native video and audio playback and the canvas element that let developers build animation and interactivity without any plugin at all. Slowly, the very features that had made Flash indispensable stopped being exclusive to Flash. Then came the moment that made the decline impossible to ignore. In the summer of 2015, a researcher published a batch of newly discovered Flash vulnerabilities so severe that Google and Mozilla independently disabled Flash Player in their browsers by default, just to protect their users. That wasn't a rumor or a prediction anymore. That was two of the biggest browser makers on the planet publicly telling people to stop using it. Sites that had run on Flash for a decade started quietly rebuilding themselves in HTML5 or simply going dark. And in July 2017, Adobe made it official. Flash Player would reach its end of life on December 31st, 2020. After that date, the plugin would stop working entirely on every browser, everywhere in the world, and almost nobody who grew up playing these games saw it coming until it was already happening. When the deadline finally arrived, it didn't feel like a single dramatic event. It felt like a light switching off in a room you'd already left. Browsers stopped running Flash content. Websites that hadn't converted their libraries to a newer format simply became empty. Thousands of games that had spent over a decade sitting quietly on old servers, playable by anyone who wanted them, were suddenly locked behind a format no computer on Earth could open anymore. For a lot of people, you'd grown up on Newgrounds and Miniclip and Kongregate. This is where the story would normally end. A format dies, the content dies with it, and eventually everyone just forgets. Except that's not what happened here, because the people who built this culture in the first place weren't willing to let it disappear quietly. Long before the official shutdown, a preservation project called Flashpoint had already begun the work of hunting down and archiving Flash games before they vanished for good. Built by volunteers and led by a developer known as Blue Maxima. The project eventually preserved close to 100,000 pieces of Flash and browser-based content, pulled from dead servers, abandoned websites, and personal archives before the links went cold forever. Around the same time, a small team of developers built something called Ruffle, an emulator that could run original Flash files directly inside a modern browser, without the insecure plugin that had caused all the trouble in the first place. And Newgrounds itself, the site where this entire culture had started 25 years earlier, integrated Ruffle directly into its own platform, so that Pickle's School and thousands of other pieces of internet history could keep running exactly where they'd already left. None of this was an accident, and none of it was inevitable. It happened because people who'd grown up inside this culture decided it was worth saving.